After living with my husband for over 11 years, there had been signs of betrayal that I ignored, until I accidentally caught my husband, Grayson, holding hands and wrapping his arm around the waist of a young woman in the elevator of an unfamiliar building. The moment he saw me, he froze, quickly let go, his face changed color. The girl tilted her head, eyes curious. "Babe, who is she?" Grayson stammered. But before he could speak, I calmly said, "I'm his wife. I'm Amanda Walker, 37 years old, founder of Boston Pet Care Veterinary, living with my husband, Grayson, in a 3-bedroom apartment in the heart of Boston." That morning, on a chilly October day, I carried Ruby, the golden retriever who had recovered after 3 weeks of treatment for stomach pain and diarrhea caused by ingesting salted snow, to return her to her previous owner, Mrs. Lorraine, a wealthy widow living in the penthouse on the 38th floor of Huntington Tower. After handing Ruby over, I gave her instructions on how to care for the dog to avoid common winter illnesses, then bent down to kiss Ruby goodbye before stepping into the elevator to return to my clinic. When the elevator stopped on the 36th floor, the doors opened and a familiar figure stepped in. It was my husband, Grayson. His arm wrapped around the waist of a young woman, the two laughing and exchanging intimate glances. The scent of expensive perfume, mixed with a faint latte aroma, lingered in the air. The moment he saw me, Grayson froze, quickly let go of her, his face momentarily tightening. The girl tilted her head, eyes curious. "Babe, who's she?" Before Grayson could stumble out an answer, I spoke calmly. "I'm his wife." The space thickened with silence, broken only by the steady hum of the elevator. Grayson regained composure and muttered, "She's just a colleague, my pickleball buddy." The girl smiled. "He's pretty strong on the court." I almost asked, "And in your bed too?" But instead, I smiled and gently replied, "Enjoy your outing." When the door opened, I stepped out, keeping my breath steady. I knew I wouldn't be able to return to the clinic. My mind was too scattered to focus on anything. Instead, I drove straight home and started cooking dinner, like any other day, as if nothing had just happened. Under the soft yellow glow of the kitchen light, water trickling between my fingers, I wondered how long I had been married to this man. 11 years. Grayson, head of investment at Meriton Capital, left the house every morning in an Italian suit, Rolex watch, Tom Ford scent, and promises of success just around the corner. Outwardly, he was the perfect man, but behind the scenes, I had bailed him out of debt more than once, from credit card bills to the Lexus registered in my name. The signs of betrayal had started appearing months ago, coming home late, claiming urgent projects, and carrying a second phone. I had trusted him and ignored those signs. Now, what I regret the most isn't his betrayal, but that I didn't trust my own intuition. The next morning, Grayson acted like nothing had happened. He walked into the kitchen holding a bouquet of white tulips, my favorite, their gentle fragrance spreading across the room. He smiled, his voice trying to be soft. "I was a little thoughtless yesterday. That girl's just a pickleball friend. I was afraid you'd misunderstand." I looked up at him, silent for a moment, then answered evenly, "I didn't misunderstand anything. I just don't want it to happen again." His smile faltered for a second, then quickly returned to its usual confident look. He poured coffee, leaned against the counter, and said in a voice that tried to sound weary, "I've been under a lot of stress lately. The company's projects are under profit pressure. I just needed to blow off some steam on the court." I nodded, not arguing. He took that as a sign of safety and continued, "I'll get things in order. You know I'm always trying for our future." I gave him a faint smile and replied, "I know." When Grayson left, the soft click of the door sounded like the period at the end of a lifeless conversation. I stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the bouquet of tulips he left on the table. A petal had fallen, soaked with leftover water from the glass vase, the only thing in the house that was honest. By noon, I returned to the clinic, resuming surgery on a dog that had swallowed a foreign object. My hands remained steady, but my mind kept circling back to that elevator scene. Every mechanical breath, every surgical light only made it clearer. I could no longer believe those tired excuses. That evening, when Grayson came home, I still cooked as usual, his favorite pasta. He sat across from me, telling stories from his day, laughing at jokes only he found amusing. I listened, nodded, responded just enough for him to believe I was still the gentle, forgiving wife. But inside, I was quietly watching. Every detail. When he left the house, the hidden phone, the late night texts, I noted it all. I didn't need to get angry. I needed clarity. And I knew, to get that, I had to start planning. At 11 p.m., while Grayson was fast asleep, his loud snores echoing through the bedroom, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the Boston city lights reflected in my glass of red wine. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a name I'd saved years ago. Paul Henson, a private investigator and former Boston police officer who once helped me track down a kidnapped foster cat. This time, the target wasn't a lost animal. It was the truth. I dialed. When he picked up, his deep, calm voice came through. "Miss Walker? Haven't heard your voice in a long time." I took a deep breath and said, "I need to know where my husband is on the nights he says he's working late, and where his money is going. I want everything done, legally." Paul was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I understand. Send me a few basic details, and I'll start from there." In the days that followed, I tried to keep my routine as normal as possible, as if nothing had changed. At the clinic, I treated a cat with a broken leg caught in a car door and injected antibiotics into a dog suffering from acute moist dermatitis. The animal trembled in my hands, its eyes reflecting a vague fear I understood more than anyone. When their owners came to pick them up, they thanked me with sincere hugs, and I smiled, trying to keep my heart from drifting toward suspicion. At noon, I stood in the back courtyard of the clinic, watching a flock of sparrows perch on the fence. The Boston sky was cold and gray, yet strangely clear. I told myself, "Be patient. The truth will come, like a wound that needs time to bleed before it can heal." 3 days later, Paul called back. His voice was raspier, tinged with hesitation. "I think you should sit down before you hear this." I gripped the phone tighter, trying to stay calm. He continued, "Grayson is renting an apartment on the 36th floor of Huntington Tower, the exact place where you saw them. The lease is under the company's name, marked as Investment Project Support." I let out a quiet, emotionless laugh, simply confirming what I already knew. "I want everything documented," I said. Paul replied, "I'll gather all legal evidence, bank statements, receipts, vehicle tracking, and if necessary, pull the security footage." After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. Outside the window, snow began to fall, thin and cold, just like the truth settling over everything around me. I pulled out my brown leather planner, the one I use for patient appointments, opened to a new page, and wrote the first line in small, firm handwriting. December 14th. The truth begins. A week later, Paul sent me an email with a brief subject line: "Video and verified documents. 36B Huntington." I opened the attachments, each frame appearing in high definition. Every clip, every receipt, every timestamp marked dates from months ago. Precisely the days Grayson told me he was on a business trip, meeting with clients, or catching up with an old friend. In the first video, Grayson and that young woman were pushing a shopping cart together at a Whole Foods near Back Bay, their hands brushing, sharing intimate smiles like they were living a different marriage. I checked the date on the camera, Friday, July 3rd. I remembered that night clearly. He texted that he had to fly to New York to meet an investor, while I stayed overnight at the clinic monitoring a critical surgery. I had believed him, even texted, "Stay warm, don't forget your stomach meds." The second clip played. They were browsing the baby section, testing small oak cribs. The woman placed a hand on her belly and smiled at Grayson, while he bent down and said something that made her laugh. The date: Sunday, August 16th. I remembered that weekend. He claimed he had to work overtime to finish the quarterly report. I even brought him coffee to the Meriton Capital office, but he replied, "Don't come, I'm in a closed meeting." Now I understood why he didn't want me there. Paul included several clips from the basement security cameras. Grayson unlocking the door to apartment 36B with a keycard, carrying grocery bags, followed minutes later by the woman in a gray robe greeting him with a quick kiss. Under the footage, Paul noted, "They stayed in the apartment the entire weekend. Grayson's car was parked here from Friday evening to Sunday afternoon." I paused at the last frame. The yellow light cast on his face. Relaxed, at ease, so unlike the exhausted expression he always brought home. The final part of the email was a set of documents, bills and statements. I skimmed through. Dinner at La Fiorentina, the Italian restaurant where we celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary, charged to the same credit card I helped him pay off just months ago. I stared at the line, "Thank you, Mr. Walker," printed on the receipt, and let out a dry, lifeless laugh. I reopened the last video, the two of them sitting side by side, red wine in hand, candlelight flickering across the table. Grayson looked content, carefree, as if life with me was a duty, and that place was where he truly felt free. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt disgusted at his deception, at how seamlessly he played his role. And as I sifted through my memories, I realized every word he'd said over the past months, every meeting, every trip, every old friend, had been carefully crafted pieces of a life I never knew he lived. I closed the screen, set the laptop aside, and sat quietly in the dark. Streetlights cast fractured reflections on the wall, hollow and cold. I inhaled deeply, then opened my leather notebook. Below the previous line, I wrote another, sharp and deliberate. From now on, every move I make will be intentional. 2 days after I wrote that line, Paul called again. His voice was gruffer and heavier than usual. "Amanda, I'm afraid this isn't just about infidelity." I heard papers rustling on his end, followed by a faint sigh. "I found a property sale contract in New Hampshire. The lakeside house under your name. It was sold 3 months ago. The signature on the contract is yours, but it's not your handwriting." I froze, gripping the receiver tightly. "Are you sure?" I asked. Paul responded firmly. "Absolutely." "I've sent you a scanned copy along with the wire transfer receipt. The payment went to an investment trust owned by Grayson." I opened the email, eyes scanning each page. The signature was nearly perfect, but I always curved the last stroke of my name slightly to the left. Here, it ended with a heavier, sharper flick. A small detail, but enough to tell me. Grayson had forged my signature. I picked up the phone and called Nora Bennett, my best friend and a corporate lawyer at a major financial firm in Boston. She picked up almost instantly. "Amanda!" "What's going on?" I sent her the entire file and waited. 10 minutes later, Nora called back. Her voice was firm. "This is civil contract forgery. If you want, I can report this to the New Hampshire Department of Justice immediately." I remained silent for a long time, then said slowly, "Not yet." "Thank you, Nora. I just needed confirmation." On the other end, she sighed. "Amanda, this isn't just marital betrayal anymore. This is fraud." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I know. And I'll handle it properly." I sat in the small office behind the clinic, usually used for pet medical records, staring through a frosted window. Outside, a few snowflakes fell onto the brick courtyard, melting as they touched the ground. I thought of my mother, the one who left me that lakeside home as a childhood gift, where I learned to swim, where I once listened to the wind rustling through pine trees. Now, that house had vanished from my name with nothing more than a signature and a man I once called husband. I realized then, emotional betrayal was only the surface. Deeper, more venomous, was financial betrayal, where someone doesn't just steal your love, but takes what you've worked your whole life to protect. 3 days later, Paul called again. His tone this time was slower, laced with hesitation, as if searching for a way to lessen the blow. Amanda, I've uncovered a few more things about the woman. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply. Go on, Paul. On the other end, he exhaled softly and said, Cleo is not Grayson's colleague, as he claimed. She works at a marketing firm in the same building as Meriton Capital. She's far from innocent. She previously hired a private investigator to learn Grayson's preferences, habits, and personal life before approaching him directly. And most importantly, she knew you and Grayson had been married for over 11 years and still had no children. I leaned back in my chair, my palms icy cold. Paul's voice continued, hoarse and dry. She's currently pregnant. But the father might not be Grayson. It could be her ex-boyfriend Dylan, a fitness trainer who used to work at the gym in that same building. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the blank space in front of me, where the office wall glowed under the dim light of the desk lamp. What I'd just heard was absurd. A man who betrayed his wife over a lie, and a woman willing to carry someone else's child to anchor a man with money. I opened my laptop and revisited old photos of Grayson. At conferences, charity galas, on my birthday. Always standing tall, smiling on cue, speaking just right. A perfect man in everyone's eyes, and now a pawn in the hands of a woman more calculating than he ever imagined. I shut the screen and rested my forehead on my hand. There was no more rage, no more pain, only a cold, hollow emptiness, as if I had just witnessed the end of a play I was forced to star in. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only pity, for two people so steeped in deceit they could no longer tell the difference between love and manipulation. I turned back to my desk, pulled out my notebook, and wrote a short, sharp line. The truth always speaks. I just have to wait for the moment it does. I put the pen down and stared at the line I had just written. A strange silence settled over the room, not the kind born of pain, but one of absolute clarity. I understood now. If Grayson could fabricate an entire life of lies, then I could build a stage where the truth would be presented in a way that no one could deny. That evening, after he left the house with the excuse of attending a party with old friends, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into our joint bank account. The numbers that flickered on the screen made my blood run cold. Grayson had transferred nearly $30,000 in the past 2 months, most of it labeled as project expenses I didn't wait. I withdrew all remaining funds from our joint account into a private account under my name and locked all shared credit cards. Each step was carried out slowly, precisely, like a surgeon removing a tumor without spilling a single drop of blood. When I finished, I opened a new folder on my computer and titled it The Honest Husband. Inside, I began writing the opening lines of what would not be a lecture, not an accusation, but a forensic report on deceit. The first page held just one sentence. Every lie has a shape. I reopened the files Paul had sent. Videos, receipts, forged contracts, wire transfers. I sorted each piece of evidence chronologically, with clean, clear annotations, almost aesthetically arranged like a medical report. I inserted photos of Grayson and her at the supermarket, the La Fiorentina bill, the home sale contract, and a side-by-side image of my real signature next to the fake, an unmistakable contrast, like a visual lesson on guilt. Each night, while Boston slept, I would tweak the slides, adjusting the background color, the fonts, the order of images. I added captions carefully, choosing words so that each phrase would land like a precise incision, deep enough that no one in that room would ever forget. By day, my work at the clinic kept me steady, but by night, I became someone else, silent, focused, unflinching. I watched my reflection in the soft glow of the screen, sharp, cold, resolved. I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was a surgeon preparing for the most significant operation of my life, the dissection of the truth. A few days later, over dinner, Grayson poured wine and said casually, "I'm thinking of throwing a party for our 12th anniversary. Might invite my boss and a few big clients. It could be a good networking opportunity. I set my glass down and looked at him. His face was so calm that had I not known the truth, I might have believed he was being sincere. But I understood. He was staging another performance, and this time I would be holding the script. I smiled and nodded. Sounds like a great idea. Invite whoever you like. I'll take care of the rest. As in previous years, he handled the guest list, and I planned the event, selected the restaurant, designed the space. The only difference this year was that I wasn't planning it for love, but for justice. 3 days later, Grayson sent me the list. Mostly executives, colleagues, and a few family members. I glanced over it and asked, "You didn't invite Cleo?" He looked up, startled, voice stammering. "Cleo?" I figured. It wasn't necessary. She's just a coworker. I smiled faintly, my gaze steady. If there's nothing inappropriate between you two, then inviting her shouldn't be a problem. On the contrary, it would prove your innocence. Grayson sat still for a few seconds, then nodded, trying to sound confident. Sure, if that's what you want. That night, I sat on the sofa and opened the reservation calendar. I chose Langford Hall, a refined venue near the Charles River, equipped with excellent acoustics, a large projector screen, and lighting perfect for an anniversary celebration. I submitted the booking request and forwarded Nora a summary of the plan. The next day, when I explained it to Nora over the phone, she sighed. "What are you planning to do, Amanda? Break down in front of everyone?" I let out a soft laugh, my voice so calm it even surprised me. "No, I don't plan to cry. I plan to teach them a lesson about honesty." The line went silent. On the other end, Nora said nothing. She knew that when I spoke in that tone, gentle, measured, but firm, it meant every step had been carefully calculated. I looked out the window at the Boston lights reflecting on the Charles River. Subtle, cold. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and smiled. The truth was about to have an audience. That evening, Boston was drenched in the chill of late December, the sky veiled in a faint mist reflecting the lights along the Charles River. I stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and adjusted my dress. The high-neck black gown I wore was a gift from Grayson on our 5th anniversary. Smooth satin, form-fitting, modest enough to exude power, yet elegant enough to hide the fact that I was preparing for a public execution. Around my neck, a string of white pearls shimmered, the same wedding gift from 12 years ago, a symbol of purity he had long since shattered. The Langford Hall banquet space was adorned with lilies and white candles, long tables draped in silk, crystal glasses aligned with precision, fine wine chilled in silver buckets. Everything looked elegant, flawless. No one would suspect that in just minutes, this setting would transform into the stage for an ugly truth. I entered, feeling eyes follow me. Grayson stood at the far end of the hall, clad in a tailored navy suit, a confident smile fixed to his face like a mask. When he saw me, his eyes paused just long enough to project the image of a devoted husband. But what made me suppress a laugh was the moment he passed Cleo without a glance, without a word, like strangers. Yet I knew. They had slept together the night before, under the guise of playing sports. I walked past them, a faint smile on my lips, a smile whose meaning only I knew. This was the last night he would ever get to perform. Cleo stood near the table in a tight red dress, her eyes darting toward me. She had no idea that I knew everything. In that moment, all I saw was a young woman trying to act confident, unaware she was about to become the prologue of the most brutal presentation of her life. Grayson approached, champagne in hand, and whispered, "You look incredible tonight." I tilted my head and replied softly, "So do you." "I hope you'll enjoy the special part of tonight," he smiled, oblivious that very smile would be frozen in time moments later. When everyone was seated and the lights dimmed, I stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, my voice calm, breath steady, as if beginning a welcome speech. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our 12th wedding anniversary," I said, scanning familiar faces. "Tonight, I'd like to share something special, a story called The Honest Husband." I nodded at the technician. The background music faded. A spotlight fell on the large screen in the center of the hall. I drew in a slow breath and smiled, my last smile as someone who once loved, before beginning the most public dissection of my life. Then I signaled for the screen to light up. The room fell completely silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning system. The lights gradually dimmed, leaving me standing beneath the single spotlight. Holding the microphone, I looked straight at the crowd, my voice deep and slow. 12 years. I've learned that honesty isn't just a virtue. It's a duty. A few people chuckled softly, assuming I was about to share some inspiring tale of marriage, while Grayson leaned back in his chair, wearing his usual half-smile of confidence. He didn't know that within seconds, everything he had built was about to collapse. The first slide appeared. A security camera photo filled the large screen. Grayson and Cleo in the elevator of Huntington Tower, his hand on her waist, their eyes locked as if no other world existed. A soft wave of whispers spread across the room. I clearly heard someone from his company murmur, "Isn't that his wife?" Grayson stiffened, lifting his head to look at me, the smile gone. I continued, my voice even, like reading a report. Slide 2. The sales contract for the lakeside house in New Hampshire. The signature says it's mine, but it's forged. I never signed any document authorizing the sale of the home my mother left me. The light glinted off his face, his eyes unfocused, lips trembling slightly. I clicked to the next slide. On the screen was a scanned bank statement, showing transactions of money transferred from our joint account into a private one labeled Meriton Special Fund. An account Grayson had opened himself, used to cover the expenses of the apartment on the 36th floor. Audible gasps echoed in the room. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, and Nora, sitting beside me, gave a quiet nod. I didn't stop. Final slide, I said. Security footage from the 36th floor, recorded Friday, July 3rd, the same day he told me he was on a business trip in New York. The screen displayed footage of Grayson unlocking the apartment door, carrying groceries. Minutes later, Cleo appeared in a gray robe, greeting him with a kiss. No one spoke. The background music had stopped entirely. Only the faint static from the microphone remained. Grayson shot up from his chair, knocking it over. "Amanda, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, his voice laced with fear and fury. I turned to him, eyes calm, no anger, no tears. "Performing a dissection of deceit," I said slowly, each word cutting like a surgical blade. He stepped toward me, reaching for the microphone, but Nora stood, blocking him. "That's enough, Grayson," she said, her voice like steel. I stepped back, signaling the technician to stop the presentation. The room sank into absolute silence. I set the microphone on the table, took a small sip of water, then looked around and spoke, my voice steady, clear. A person can lie, but evidence cannot. And tonight, I simply let the truth speak for me. No one clapped, no one laughed. Only the sound of Grayson's heavy breathing and the faint crash of the glass he had dropped, shattered like his life, right there at his own anniversary celebration. The next morning, Boston welcomed a soft drizzle, cold and fine, as if washing away the noise of the night before. I woke early, brewed a cup of coffee, and opened my phone. Right there on the financial news site, the headline read, "Meriton Capital suspends head of investment, Grayson Walker, amid internal audit." Below, the article continued, "The company is conducting a comprehensive review of personal transactions within the investment division." I read that far, sipped my coffee, and felt an unexpected calm. Paul texted me briefly. "Cleo's caught in it too. Both are under financial investigation." By noon, the news was everywhere. Cleo was fired by her marketing firm for professional misconduct. The same girl who once smiled in all those videos had now become the subject of ridicule. That afternoon, I went to Nora's office. She was waiting for me under the warm light, a thick folder on her desk. "Divorce papers, asset division agreement, clinic ownership transfer," she said briskly. I flipped through each page, read every line carefully, and signed without hesitation. When the pen lifted from the final page, a strange lightness settled over me. According to the agreement, I retained 70% of our shared assets and full ownership of Boston Pet Care Veterinary, the only thing I truly considered family. 3 days later, I returned to the old house one last time to pack my things. Everything was quiet. The wedding photo on the wall caught the light in a way that made it look like someone else's frame, no longer connected to me. I removed it, leaving the empty frame on the table, a polite period at the end of a fabricated marriage. I packed a few clothes, some documents, and my laptop into the trunk of the car. When I shut the door, I didn't look back. The Lexus engine started with a soft purr in the damp air. I drove across the Longfellow Bridge, the city of Boston stretching out behind me. Once a place of memories, now just an old backdrop. I took nothing with me except what belonged to me, and a mind steady enough to begin again. 1 week later, I signed the purchase contract for the penthouse on the 61st floor of the building across from my clinic. From the balcony, I could see the Boston Pet Care Veterinary sign light up every morning, a reminder that everything I have today was built by my own hands, not by carrying any man's name. The new apartment wasn't as large as the old house, but it had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Charles River, where the morning sun poured in just enough to dissolve any lingering darkness. I brought only a few old belongings. A photo of my mother, the woman who always taught me that sometimes silence is the strongest answer. My old coffee maker, the only wedding gift I truly valued because it had been mine before we got married. And the silver necklace my grandmother gave me when I graduated college, the one item that still felt like it truly belonged. On the first day I moved in, I opened all the windows, letting the cold air blow through, sweeping out the smell of fresh paint in the past. I brewed a cup of coffee, set it on the table, and played soft jazz. The early light cast moving reflections on the walls, making the apartment feel like it had a soul. There was no more shadow of deceit. That evening, as the city lights flickered on, I opened my laptop and created a new file titled The Honest Husband. I wasn't writing for revenge, nor to turn pain into a weapon. I only wanted to record the journey I had walked, step by step, to remind myself that truth, no matter how cruel, is the only foundation upon which a person can stand. I typed the first sentence, simple and honest. Sometimes, to find honesty, you have to lose everything you once believed was real. Then I sat still, listening to the soft patter of rain against the glass, the city lights reflected in my coffee. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because someone loved me, but because I had finally chosen myself. A few weeks later, while writing the second chapter of The Honest Husband, news of Grayson began to spread across financial headlines. It started as a small article in an investment column, but quickly went viral. Meriton Capital faces class action lawsuit, head of investment. Grayson Walker accused of financial fraud and fund misuse. The article spanned over 1,000 words, detailing how he had concealed major investment losses using falsified records and used company funds for personal expenses. His name now appeared alongside the phrase, "under federal investigation." I read the article on a Monday morning while sitting at a cafe across from my clinic. The cappuccino in front of me had gone cold, but I felt remarkably warm. Not from gloating, but because justice, finally, had begun to move. A few days later, Paul sent me a brief message. He's lost his financial license. The Department of Justice has handed the case to the feds. I replied with just 2 words. Thank you, Paul. The following month, I overheard one of Grayson's former colleagues mention that he was now living in a cheap co-living space on the outskirts of Cambridge, a place for the unemployed to share a kitchen, a living room, and tales of collapse. Grayson had been seen frequently at a nearby dive bar, hair unkempt, shirt wrinkled, clutching cheap beer. From the man who once flaunted his Rolex and Italian suits, he had become a shadow of himself, empty and unraveling. And then, as life's cruel symmetry often goes, Cleo vanished. As soon as she realized Grayson had no money left, she quietly disappeared. No goodbye, no message. Months later, I heard she had given birth. The child didn't bear the Walker name and moved back in with her parents in Ohio. Her social media was wiped clean. No photos, no trace. As if she had never existed in this story at all. I stared at the update on my phone and smiled faintly. Not because they had fallen, but because at last, the performance was over, and the stage was now left to truth. Simple, cold, but fair. One late autumn afternoon, as golden leaves began covering the paths along the river, I received an unexpected call. On the other end was Mrs. Lorraine, the owner of the golden retriever from long ago. Her voice was deep and warm, tinged with the tremble of old age. "Amanda, Ruby misses you terribly." She still sits by the elevator door whenever she hears footsteps, thinking you've come back. I smiled gently, a warmth spreading through my chest. "I'll come visit her," I replied. That evening, I brought a bag of treats and some dog vitamins, driving to Huntington Tower, the place where everything had once begun. As I stepped into the lobby, I heard the echo of my own footsteps, but this time, they didn't sting. The elevator still lit up floor 38, and old memories flickered through, light as smoke. Mrs. Lorraine welcomed me with a kind smile. "She heard you from down the hall and started barking," she said, opening the door. Instantly, Ruby bounded out, barking excitedly, circling me, her tail wagging so hard it nearly knocked over a vase. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around her. Her golden fur pressed against my chest, and her deep brown eyes shone with a pure, unfiltered joy. I stroked her head gently, feeling her steady heartbeat and the familiar scent of dog fur mixed with chamomile tea in the room. I closed my eyes. The elevator, Grayson's gaze, sleepless nights, all of it faded, leaving only quiet and gratitude. I looked at Mrs. Lorraine and smiled softly. "She's loyal, still remembers someone who cared for her just a few weeks," she replied gently. "Honest creatures always recognize those who treated them truthfully." I held Ruby close, feeling her warmth seep into me, real, gentle, and steady. In that moment, I understood that loyalty still exists. It just wasn't where I had once misplaced my faith. One morning, with Boston still wrapped in a light mist, I took Ruby for a walk across the Longfellow Bridge. The Charles River breeze swept through my hair, carrying the scent of salt water and coffee from nearby cafes. The sun began to rise, golden light rippling across the water, bathing the city in the hue of new beginnings. Ruby trotted ahead, ears perked, tail swaying in the early light. I watched her, free, innocent, unburdened by the past, and smiled without thinking. In that stillness, I realized I too was learning to walk like her, peacefully, without looking back, without needing anyone to lead the way. I stopped in the middle of the bridge, the wind stronger now, tugging at strands of hair around my face. Sunlight pierced the mist, scattering reflections across the river like shards of broken glass, beautiful, honest, and unstageable. I inhaled deeply, the cold air filling my chest, and whispered, just for myself, a quiet voiceover to close the story. Honesty doesn't need forgiveness, it just needs to be seen. Ruby barked softly, then kept running forward toward the light. I followed, feeling the bridge hum beneath my feet, heart light as if I'd just set everything down. And in that moment, amid Boston's dawn, the wind, and the breath of freedom, I knew my life had truly begun again. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this one. If you believe that honesty is sometimes the loneliest road, but also the one that leads us to real freedom, share this story. Because sometimes, it only takes one person brave enough to speak the truth to help others find their way back to themselves.